sneaking up on our freedoms, destroying our health, shredding the Constitution, taking away our wealth. Ah, but we're the men and women following freedom's trail, following where the truth leads. We will prevail.
And prevail we will. You are listening to the Dr. Rima Reports. This is Rima Ilebo, MD, speaking to you. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. Speaking to you from California. With me, of course, as always, my co-host and co-trustee of the Natural Solutions Foundation, Ralph Fusatola, JD, who is speaking to us from New Jersey. And with us also is Leslie Carol Botha, who is, I am proud to announce, the new Women's Health Coordinator of the Natural Solutions Foundation. And she is speaking to us from a region troubled by a huge forest fire. Leslie, where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and
Okay.
we have one of the mother of all fires going here, wildfires going here in Larimer County, 8,000 acres, and destroying many homes and areas that are close to all of our hearts here in the mountains west of Colorado, and very sad to see. So I can only stay for a short while here this morning, but thank you so much for the honor of joining you, and then I will have to help my neighbors evacuate most of the day and afternoon, and be there to support them as this wildfire is raging our mountains.
We wish you speedy relief from this natural catastrophe. I assume it's a natural catastrophe, am I correct?
We don't know the cause of the fire, but it's so dry here. I mean, unfortunately, it takes nothing to start a wildfire. I lived through a wildfire many years ago, and it was started by the exhaust from a car. Just someone started their car, and a spark ignited the grass right under it, and it caused a horrible wildfire.
Wow. So
yeah.
what you're saying, excuse me, General Burt is creating a pot of Valley of the Moon coffee for me this very moment, which should help my voice a bit. What you're saying is that the web of nature is fragile, and if it is disturbed in even a minor way, it can have enormous consequences. I think as the new Women's Health Coordinator of the Natural Solutions Foundation, we should talk a bit about the fragile nature of human health. Now, this of course applies to men's health as well as women's health, but there are special factors that impact women's health that not only make it extremely easy to interfere with the biological efficiency and function of the whole system, but in addition to that, make women's health a political issue. Now, women's health has always been a political issue because women's health includes reproductive function, and reproductive function has never been neutral. It's not just something that a woman's body does, nor, by the way, of course, does a woman's body do carry out its reproductive function by itself, but it has become, since I think time immemorial, it's fair to say that reproduction and control of reproduction has been a political issue to the state or to the religious state in many ways throughout a lot of human history. Why is it necessary, Leslie, to have a specific coordinator for women's health in a health freedom movement? Let's talk about health freedom and women's health.
Brilliant. That was a brilliant statement. I mean, and that is the underlying issue here, whether we're talking about the HPV vaccines, women's health, which has been politicized, the medicalization of women's bodies. This goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, the president of the American Congress of Obstetrics and Gynecology just came out with a statement in the New York Times telling politicians to get out of our exam rooms. That's on my website at holyhormones.com. What we have lost sight of is the sacredness of women. Period. Period. That's it. Women were revered. We were goddesses, if you will, and revered as goddesses, if you will, at one point in time because of our menstrual cycle. And not just because of the ability to create and to sustain life and to grow life in our bodies and bring life into the world. Yes, that is huge. But the menstrual cycle is part of this larger web, Dr. Labo, that you refer to, this web of life. The menstrual cycle is one of the natural cycles in the world, and there are thousands of natural cycles. The endocrine system is our rhythm. It is the drumbeat to which we must follow. And there are so many things disrupting that.
I would like to interrupt you for one moment, Leslie, and point out that this is not merely poetic excess, which Leslie is sharing with us. This is biological fact. Every part of our normal function is indeed a rhythmic, orchestrated cycle. For example, the enzymes of our cells, and there are about 35,000 enzymatic reactions taking place at any moment in every one of the 10 trillion cells of your body, to say nothing of the 100 trillion bacteria that your body relies upon for proper functioning. They're all timed by the frequency of the earth. We dance to the frequency of the earth's resonance, the Schumann frequency, just as the menstrual cycle dances to the frequency of the moon. We're talking about deep, deep integration into the very nature of life. And Ralph, I will ask you specifically to comment in terms of the legal systems that have been used to control these very essential biological cycles. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Leslie. I wanted to point out. Well, I guess I did mean. I apologize for interrupting you.
No, that is all right. I was waxing poetic, as they say.
No. But your poetry,
brilliance it's people need to know this. This is science. This is fact. I mean, and this is the beauty of the age that we live in. And you and Ralph both know this. Science and spirituality are melding, blending. Finally. Science is catching up. Spirituality is risen from the religious cults that we have been stuck in for so many years. And we are understanding and finally able to look at the importance of cycles in our lives. And they are all important. And that is what I am delighted to be able to bring to the National Natural Solutions Foundation. Is this understanding and the importance of this rhythmic cycle that our bodies thrive in. And when we don't live within cycles, we live in chaos. And what we are seeing around us is chaos and the manipulation of bodies. And let's go back to women's health. Women have been considered the second sex. Our bodies have been medicalized, institutionalized, vaccinated, birth controlled to death, and literally to death, and our reproduction, our fertility is at stake. The fertility of the planet is at stake. The survival of the planet is at stake. But then on the other hand, one must really think seriously about procreating in this chemical toxic dump that we are living in right now. Cheryl Jazar and I spoke about this on my radio show, that women who are considering getting pregnant must really consider detoxing their bodies before trying, and that goes for men too, because men produce sperm on a daily basis. We need to consider detoxing our bodies before we're considering reproducing. How sad is that? That is a sad state of affairs.
We also need to consider detoxing our emotions and our minds before we reproduce, because toxic emotions and toxic minds damage children just as surely as toxic bodies.
Brilliant statement. Absolutely brilliant statement. I mean, when we bring children into sad, depressed, angry situations, even in utero, and we all know that more abuse happens to women when they're pregnant than at any other time. This is causing great harm,
including an 8-month pregnant woman being tased 2 days ago by the Chicago police for a parking ticket. This is not the first time this has happened. It's another time that this has happened.
If it happens to one woman, it happens to all of us.
Exactly.
And I will say that to the end of my days on this planet. And that is what I believe. And that is why I've been in this work for now over 30 years, Dr. Lebo, as much as you have. We are bringing awareness. And
I disagree with one thing that you just said, Leslie. If it happens to one woman, it happens to all of us as humans, whether we are men or women. In the same way that if an abuse happens to a man, it happens to all of us. I think, to me, it's very important to remember that it's not just about gender-divided people, it's about humanity. And we are fighting for health and health freedom for everyone on the planet, whether we know them or not, whether we share a menstrual cycle with them or not, whether we share a political or a cultural view with them.
And I would agree with all of that. However, and I beg to disagree on this one issue. Men have a fabulous sense of mankind. It is set in stone. It is a foundation. We see men stand up for each other, whether they murder, maim, kill, rape. They're all there for each other. Ralph, and nothing intended here, but men stand together. Women do not have that same sense of womankind.
How do men stand together when they put on fancy clothes and go kill each other?
There is this bond that men have. Women have yet to develop this bond. And until we develop this bond, we cannot have a sense of womankind, nor can we have a sense of humankind. So, I mean, I love what you say. I love where you're going. And yes, this affects the men in our world, but we need to lift women to understand that we are sisters, that we have a sense of womankind, and that what we have in common is this menstrual cycle, this hormone cycle, this rhythm of the universe. It gives us power, and once we understand that, then we can have a foundation to stand on to embrace and become a part of this humankind. And until that happens, it's like the first stepping stone for me, and what has been my work.
Before I ask you to tell us how you came to this point, tell us your history, I'm going to ask Ralph to give us his comment as a health freedom advocate, as a man without a menstrual cycle. As far as I know Ralph well, but he's never mentioned his menstrual cycle to me.
True, true. But I'm sure we all are affected by the cycles of the moon, whether
Absolutely.
and I'm sure there are hormonal ups and downs that track that 28 day.
Absolutely so.
This is the rhythm of our life. Hormones. Hormones rule our bodies. Dr. Lebo, you know this. And every person even if they're not aware, hormones are the body's communication systems. And if the hormones in our bodies are out of balance, well, heck, look at diabetes. Look at the rampant epidemic of diabetes. That's all hormone controlled, endocrine system controlled. Hormones affect how we think, they affect the health of our body, and they affect our actions. I mean, there's even been studies documenting how testosterone affects the stock market and affected the stock market in the crash of 2008.
Without testosterone, there wouldn't be a stock market.
I don't know. The first markets were probably mediated by women. The first markets were probably
by women,
yeah.
But that's not the same as the dominance, which is separated from the reality of production and distribution and consumption by a fiction that the stock market in fact rests upon. So I meant that. I wasn't being funny. It is a prime example of the domination ethos applied to goods and services, as opposed to the cooperation ethos applied to goods and services.
See, I always felt the market is actually a great example of exactly that type of cooperation. It is the one place where people enter as equals and enter without violence. You know,
I would say the activities of Wall Street and the banksters are about as violent as you.
Yeah, but they're also not in any really meaningful sense market activities. They are, political activities.
They are Wall Street activities.
Indeed.
They are Wall Street, and the banks.
Well, that's why they have bulls and bears, apparently.
Yeah, exactly, bulls and bears. Let me get Ralph's comment on the legal and social control of women throughout history, because he's not only an attorney, he's a scholarly attorney. And then I want to get your history, Leslie. I want you to tell us how you got to be Leslie Botha on this show today. Ralph, tell us what your thoughts are, because we were talking without giving you any space there.
In Victorian times, they used the euphemism, the infirmities of women. That's an important phrase, the infirmities of women. These were not physical infirmities in any sense, although Victorian women played that role very well, but they were legal infirmities. A woman was always under the control of a man, unless she was both a widow and had no children, and then she was independent. The wife of Bath, for example, is a good indication.
Which was not Victorian times.
Right,
that
rather
was
longer before that.
Medieval times.
Right, but that whole it really lasts from the ancient city through Victorian times, and the emancipation of women. And the phrase emancipation was literally the term that was used, did not happen until the late 1800s, maybe a little earlier than that. Actually, the Victorian era may be the beginning of the legal emancipation of women. But women were subject to some male. They could not dispose of their own property. Some male had ultimate authority over it, even though it was their property, and it went from their father's control to their husband's control, but never to theirs, except in those instances of widowhood with and whatnot. So this is all something that developed for thousands of years, and it was a way of controlling. It was a way of controlling property. That's what you have to really understand. It was all about controlling landed property, and when landed property became less important, I guess, as a source of wealth, that whole structure began to collapse. And part of that process, women gained the power to control their own estates, and then, of course, the right to participate in political activities and all the rest of the things that followed, that led to the base from which the latter 20th century women's movement really started. Without without the end of the emancipation of women and the political changes, the social changes that happened in the generations thereafter would probably not have occurred.
I see that society has in many ways developed because of or out of the attempt to control wealth, as you mentioned, land and wealth, land as wealth, to control concepts, thought and thinking, to control what people believe. That's propaganda, that's the social manipulation of the state, which is nothing new. We're seeing it now at a kind of multiplied level, perhaps greater than we've ever seen before, but it's not a new trend. Heresy and the concept of not being allowed to think anything that the state didn't want you to think, or the religion didn't want you to think, is an ancient concept of control. For instance, Socrates was forced to drink hemlock and kill himself, forced to execute himself at the will of the state, because he was thinking things, worse yet, asking questions about things that the state did not wish him to ask questions about. We now have indefinite detention and the assassination kill list for people who irritate the state by thinking and therefore doing things that the state does not want or does not like. But the process is the same. That was an assassination squad that stood around and watched Socrates die. The examples are all too common. But the third thing that I believe that society has developed in order to achieve is the control of women's reproduction and their capacity to require more reproduction, to require less reproduction, to control the power that Leslie referred to women as having. And women do indeed have power. They nurture and rear life in every society. And by extension, by the way, it is no surprise that women are the people who make the food decisions in every society and who make the health decisions in every society, because they start out feeding and nurturing anyone or anything that comes onto this planet and becomes even a semblance of a human being. So society has always tried, well, with the exception of the goddess-dominated societies, society has always tried to control reproduction, fertility, understanding, and wealth. That's what society is. It's a control system for all of that. And all of the excesses of society are about excessive attempts to control thought, freedom, wealth, and fertility. So this battle that we're fighting today is not only a scientific battle, it is most essentially a cultural and political battle. Would either of you disagree with that?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. There's a Native American saying that goes something like this: a nation is not defeated until the heart of its women are on the ground.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the hearts of women have been on the ground here in this part of the world for a very, very long time. They are on the ground and they have been downtrodden. It's a very sad thing. Ralph, I loved what you said about bringing in this history of women. You look at women in mental illness, you look at women in addiction, you look at women, who was it? Ibsen's book, The Dollhouse, was my first wake-up call many, many years ago about the plight of women. I interviewed a woman on my radio show many years ago, and her name will come back to me, But we were talking about the history of women and the state of affairs that women are in now, and her brilliant comment is that our DNA still holds the memory of the witch burnings.
Right.
Let's look at those witch burnings. And for all of your listeners, one of the most fabulous books I've ever read is the memoirs of Elizabeth Stein, Frank Fierzak, one of the great social political
Leslie, you're breaking up, and we
political researchers. One of the great social political writers, educators of our time. Again, the memoirs of Elizabeth Frankenstein talks about the crossroad between the patriarchy and paganism, when science and medicine took hold over the healing arts. Dr.
Right.
Labo, you got to love that one. It really, and that is where we are at. The healing arts is being dominated by the science and control of a patriarchy, of an industry.
Let me give
But
you.
let me finish my
I'm sorry.
because no, not your fault, because I digress. But in order to survive the burnings, the healing art, women had to deny their womanhood. They had to deny their knowledge. They had to deny their intuition. They had to deny their spirituality. And then in children were turned. And yes, they had to also deny their belief system to survive. And women, according to
Leslie, you're breaking up very badly. I'm having a hard time recording you. That's okay.
My suggestion is that we call Leslie back. Will that work, Ralph?
Well, let me
Because
see.
what
She
you're
seems to
saying
be a
is
little
so
better. I
important.
know. Leslie,
Okay,
let's have a sound check, Leslie.
Okay, let's do check.
You're doing okay now. Okay.
Oh yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, in order for women and men they deny themselves, and women still carry this memory in their DNA, which is why we have been suppressed and continue to be suppressed for so many years.
Well, literally, women had. If a woman showed that she had knowledge of herbs, for example, she was a witch and was killed. And so, literally, those who survived were the ones without that propensity to be healers, to a certain degree.
Exactly.
Or those who had the propensity to
prevaricate,
to deny their knowledge and maintain it anyway.
True. And that happened.
Leslie, how did you get to be the passionate advocate of women's health and health freedom that you are?
Thank you for asking. It really started quite innocently, but I was at a college in upstate New York, outside of Ithaca, New York, where Cornell University is one of the great colleges, and I was at Hobart and William Smith College. It was the end of the Vietnam War. Certainly the veil was falling, and the veil was falling for me, and looking at what was being taught and looking at what was the truth. It was a tumultuous time in many of our many people's lives at that time. But be that as it may, I left school. I was told by the president of some university or some fraternity that by the time I got out of college, I would no longer think the way I think. And I was like, I'm not opting in for that.
Good for you.
All right.
That's not why I'm here. So I knew I was going to be out before the end of my second year, so I took third and fourth year courses and got a hell of an education. Religion, social science, political science, history, fabulous. And then left. Made it out to Fort Collins, Colorado, walked into Planned Parenthood for an exam, and was so enthralled by the education, and I know Planned Parenthood is a controversial organization. I get that part. I was so enthralled by the education that I received that I started volunteering. And I stayed 5 years, became a part of the staff, and had some medical training as much as I could get. But what really happened to me is that the director of the clinic in Fort Collins, Colorado, one of the most influential women in my life, Sue Ellen Alice House, took me into her office and said, read. She had a wall filled with books about women written by women. And at that point in time, my life turned around. It was what was missing in my life at this patriarchal college. It was what was missing in my life from the patriarchal religion. It was what was missing in my life from the patriarchal social structure. I started understanding women from women's point of view, women's history, women's mythology, women's archaeology, women's religion, women's understanding of their bodies. And I felt filled, still, if you will. It was that pivotal a moment in my life. And that was coupled with now my understanding of cycles and the importance of the menstrual cycle. Barbara Ehrenreich, Nurses, Witches, and Midwives, fabulous book that she wrote. How many of the Judy Grun writings on the menstrual cycle. There were so many books that I read about goddesses and women and the menstrual cycle. And then I was at the front desk at Planned Parenthood, and now armed with this knowledge, I was noticing that women were walking into the clinic with the same problems month after month on the same day of their menstrual cycle. Meaning, a woman would come in on day 23 with a migraine. A woman would come in on day 24 with a herpes infection. A woman would come in on day 20 with a vaginal infection. And I would say to them, do you know that you were here last month on the same day of your menstrual cycle with the same problem? And because we have no concept of cycles, they would say no. And then again, that light turned on. I went, well, this is repetitive. It's predictive. And if it's repetitive and it's predictive, then it's preventable. And that's when I started my journey on trying to unravel the myths around the menstrual cycle, because I grew up in an age when I was told, we were all told, oh, it's too complicated, honey, you can't understand that. Nobody can understand ovulation. It's all has to be done by a doctor who knows better than you.
And I'll tell you what the doctors were told.
Yeah, exactly.
Being on the doctor side of that particular toxic seesaw, the doctors were told, first of all, women are terrible historians. When a woman tells you what's happened to her, you cannot believe it. Point number one. And that's because of the fact that women are hysterical. The word hysteria comes from the concept, comes from the concept of the wandering uterus. Women's uteri, said the early physicians in the Greek times, wandered around, or the impact of their uteri wandered around in their body, and it made their brains not work properly. It also made every other organ in their body not work properly because the uterus was toxic. And therefore, women were essentially defined by a toxicity. And women were not reliable historians. They couldn't tell you what happened to them. And if something happened to them that had to do with, for instance, mood, or had to do with water retention, which has to do with mood, or had to do with anything else touching upon their body in a way that might be cyclic, in that, those women and everything that they were telling you, those women were psychologically disturbed. So if the body impacted the mind of a woman, or if a woman thought that the body impacted her mind, then she was to be discounted.
And then the doctors came up with their opiates, and women could be controlled much more easily.
Absolutely. And now we're being controlled by Prozac, all these other antidepressants. Take two Valium, go home, honey, is kind of the industry line. We're being controlled by birth control, hormone replacement therapy, because we cannot control reproduction, and I say that, quote, control reproduction, without affecting the mind, body, spirit of a woman. It's called the dumbing down of womanhood. And that is what we see going on. And when women are dumbed down, then the men and children in our life become victims and dumbed down as well. And
you talk about that on your website, I assume. You talk about that on your website, and I've got on our screen, because the people who are watching this through healthfreedomportal.org are also seeing some slides coming up. And right now I have Holy Hormones Journal on the screen. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what is Holy Hormones, and how does it fit into what you're just telling us? I have a suspicion it fits.
I was walking around a lake in Fort Collins, Colorado in the 1980s, and I went, holy hormones. and that's what came to me. It was the first Batman days. You know, Batman was all the rage, and that sort of popped into my head, and I went, oh my God, isn't that great? And who thought I would have made a name on something so silly as holy hormones? But it's sacred hormones. And that's really the point. Now, my blog, which is over 4,000 posts, and I do have a book coming out called Understanding Your Mind with Hormone Cycle, used to be purely informational about women's health and the importance of cycles. And now it's become 100% social political, because of the atrocities happening in women's reproductive health. And that is what I'm posting, as much as I am trying to post information, but the atrocities that are going on in all areas of women's health are pretty horrific. And unless we're aware of it, we're not going to understand what is going on. Breast cancer risk associated with 5 basic protocols. I wrote a press release for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research. Canada, older women may be at risk taking Gardasil for cervical cancer prevention. Another woman, Dr. Jen Gunter, wrote a piece on what drives women to have risky home abortions. These are all really things that we need to be understanding. So I'm trying to gather information from multiple sources and put them into this Holy Hormones Journal, so that women have information in one source to start making decisions about their health care. We have Hormone Health US News, Hormone Health World News, Inconvenient Woman, Birth Rate, Is This For Real? Justice Department, 1 in 3 Native American women raped. Religion cited for denial of emergency contraception to Oklahoma rape victim. I mean, these are real subjects, and unless women really understand what is going on to women around the world, but we're never going to get a handle on all of this. So all of these things are so important to me, to educate and empower women, starting with each and every one of us individually, to understand our hormone harmony. And Dr. Label can add so much to that as a medical doctor, obviously. But once we get in sync with ourselves and trust ourselves, once we understand our hormonal harmony, our hormonal ebbs and flows, if you will, not only will we be able to trust ourselves instead of feeling like we need to take this drug and that drug to control our emotions, or to control our appetite, or to control our weight, or to control our image, or we need to go get plastic surgery, or all this labo, whatever suction it's called. And actually there's all this plastic surgery happening on women's labia.
Absolutely.
But the men in our lives will be able to trust us. Our children will be able to trust us. I see women as the nucleus of the atom, and that the men and children thrive when that nucleus is strong and sound, because women are I mean, we are integral. We dance the rhythm of the universe. We hold that with our menstrual cycle, with our endocrine system. And when we hold that, and when that is stable in our lives, and the men and children in our lives become stable, when that nucleus of the atom is chaotic, then the men and children in society become chaotic. It is as simple as that. And we have to regain our center for the survival of this planet.
Can you talk a little bit about uh, why you make the statement that men and children and society thrive when women thrive? Let's talk about the science of that and the sociology.
Oh boy, that now that's how many hours do we have?
250.
I think that her story, and I am saying her story and not history, when we read back and read her story and the woman's version of facts, um, that society thrives on matriarchy. And it is not the matriarchy versus the patriarchy type of concept. It is not women in control. It is a society that is governed by natural cycles, circadian rhythm. Women were tracking their menstrual cycles on antler bones 250,000 years ago. Women were integral to these societies because they understood the importance of cycles. It's in Ecclesiastes in the Bible. There is a time to give, there is a time to receive. That alone is the rhythm of life. Women embed that in our bodies. And because of that, we were sociologically, politically important in the life of Jesus Christ, in all of the great prophets. Behind every man, behind every great man, there is a great woman. We know that. Um, the wives of the presidents and the leaders of the world are probably more important than their husbands. We know that. We're not just bedfellows, if you will. And what we need to do is understand that women have more value than what lies between our legs. And that is the message that we have been brought up with and told. I have worked with sexually abused girls in teen treatment programs. And the data that I walked away with after sharing with them women's history, teaching them about the value of their menstrual cycle, helping them understand their physical, mental, emotional symptoms in relation to where they are in their menstrual cycle, the data that I walked away that broke my heart is that 90% of these young girls ages 13 to 17 ended up in jail committing crimes when they had and they had their periods in jail.
And they had what? I couldn't hear you.
Periods. They were menstruating when they were in jail. They would get their periods when they got into jail, which means that they are acting out premenstrually. All right? Every woman listening, every man listening, stop and think. You know, women, you know that when you get premenstrual, you get angry, you get depressed. Did you know that alcohol affects you 10 times more when you're premenstrual because your hormone levels change? Then you're going, wow. I can hear you all going, wow. So that's what's going on here. We are driven by our hormones, and we don't understand that hormonal dance. We get into problems. Teen girls rebel. They drink, they drug, they think the only value they have in their lives is opening up legs for men because of the real sense of their history. They get into arguments with their lovers who may or may not be menstrual. They run away. They attempt suicide. They get raped more often, and they end up in jail. This is a huge social issue. Are these girls delinquents? Hell no. They're brilliant. They're beautiful. They're wounded creatures who do not understand the hormones that drive their bodies and their behaviors. And this is a big problem, social political problem in our lives. And because of that, it has affected our history, and it has affected our self-worth. And this civilization is going into the pothole because of it.
Last week, I handed Professor Tony Piera my magic wand. And I said, unfortunately, it's not working because the battery, the special battery that I need, is simply not available. I can't find it in the shops anywhere. But if my magic wand were working, what would you do in terms of sustainability and putting the earth back together again? This week, I'm handing you my equivalent of a magic wand. If you were able to make all of the changes that you need and that you believe in, how would you fix this situation? Because if we can't fix it, there's really no point talking about it.
Here's the deal. It is simply this. We know about collective consciousness. We know what we can do when we work together as a group. Imagine every single woman on this planet menstruating in synchronicity. Like we used to do. Oh yeah, we did. Oh yes, we did. Imagine the power that would come with the knowledge of understanding your mind, mood, and hormone cycle. Imagine 51% of this world knowing when they were the most powerful and they could move mountains and initiate change. And imagine 51% of of the population then knowing when it was time to rest, when it was time to intuit, when it was time to say grace, to receive messages. And then imagine 51% of this population going out again when their hormones are rising after menstruation and the letting go, and moving those mountains again. This is not about me. All I need to do is to educate women, and the science is there. And then this is empowering each and every woman to take up the sword, because she will understand finally the power that she has, and the changes will be made in every single area of life, because women will understand the power of living with cycles, the power of the dance of our universe, and we will be able to save the planet.
This is very interesting in light of the Global Consciousness Project that we've spoken about before, where people attempt to measure the effect of unified consciousness on the planet. So you're saying that women start from the basis of having that unified consciousness. They can, if they get in touch with their own cycles, basically come in sync with many, many, many of the women around the world. And that being in sync has a significant effect on the way not just women, but the way the men and children around them also feel.
And that is the great fear of the patriarchy. And that is right, is that women will understand really the power that we do have, and we will bring justice to what is wrong in this world. And so look at that in terms of the fact of what the patriarchy has done to destroy women, to destroy consciousness, to destroy our ability to create life, and to undermine us on all levels. And it becomes very clear. It's not rocket science. Dr. Labo, you know this. I mean, we all know that. I have another article posted on my website about Victorian women sent to asylums for stress, postnatal depression, and anxiety. This is all related to hormone imbalance. I've had 4 women contact me this week on an article that I posted in 2009 about hormonal anxiety. We are drugged to death. And whether it is birth control pills, hormone replacement therapy, or the Gardasil vaccine, HPV vaccines, we are being drugged to death to keep our power down. Oh gosh, I can never remember this man's name, and he's passed. It was either Daniel Schlain or Leonard Schlain, wrote Sex, Time, and Money. Dr. Labo or Ralph were referring to, and I apologize if I'm giving out incorrect names.
I do not remember his first name. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Thank you. But he, in his book on sex, time, and money, he wrote this incredible paragraph about how, since the introduction of HRT and birth control pills, that how women have lost their power, and how very few women leaders there are in the world today, making a significant impact because of the dumbing down of women.
That's an important correlation, which goes back to the first premise that I shared with the radio audience at the beginning of the show. Society sets out to control information and thought, wealth and resources, and reproduction. Let's talk about HPV vaccine, a subject that I know you've been very active in bringing information forward on.
Thank you. I would like to talk about that, and I was bringing this up on my radio show many years ago from a women's health point of view. First of all, HPV is a virus. We've all been exposed to it. Most of us have been exposed to it. The CDC, the FDA, all the Merck, they all know that. But they hear it again because it may cause cervical cancer in this hidden part, this hidden dark secret part of a woman's body. Women go, oh my God, and we just say, oh my God, I need to get this vaccine because I might have this cervical cancer thing going on and I can't see this part of my body and it's icky anyway, right?
Well, let me introduce a little bit of information. When Leslie says we've all been exposed, what she's saying is that the human papillomavirus, HPV, is a normal part of the biological diversity of a woman's reproductive tract. The human papillomavirus, HPV, has never been shown to cause cancer. Never. It is a...
The CDC has acknowledged that. There has been no direct link between HPV and cervical cancer. It's right on the National Cancer Institute website. And so it's anybody who's in the know about HPV knows that HPV stands for help pay for Vioxx.
Yes, exactly. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, I mean, Vioxx was, we see so many drugs that are fast-tracked through the FDA. Vioxx was one of those drugs, causing great harm to a large population of people, and yet it still took years and lawsuits and before it was taken off the market. And here's the deal, people. We are the guinea pigs. They might have their clinical trials, or pharmaceutical companies have their clinical trials, but the clinical trials are a sham. I mean, they manipulate those trials so they have the results, so it's worth their investors' dollars to put into this whatever miracle drug that they're coming up with. And we are the long-term experiments. The birth control is one of the largest uncontrolled medical experience in human history. We are just starting to see the tip of the iceberg on that one. Absolutely. And that's just one. So here we have the HPV vaccine for a virus that most of us have been exposed to, that is supposedly set up for people to protect them from cervical cancer before they're exposed to HPV. And it was made out to be this sexually transmitted disease, and let's get these virgins before they've been exposed to HPV. Doesn't happen. HPV is just like a herpes virus. You get it from human contact in utero. Babies can contract it. Fetuses and babies being born can contract it in the vagina. It's in the anus. It's in the throat. It's a virus. We don't fight viruses. We build our immune system. Viruses are a part of our natural environment.
And let me point out something that most people forget to take into account. Just as there are beneficial bacteria and there are bacteria which are neutral to us. Actually, there are things that are not designed specifically for the human organism, but there are neutral viruses. There are also bacteria. There are also bacteria whose presence is essential to our immune system functioning. The same thing is true of viruses. We now know that there are about 10,000 viruses that we know about whose presence is either beneficial or merely stimulatory to the immune system to keep it in a state of readiness, functional readiness, which is another way of being beneficial, but they're not directly contributing to our well-being in any specific way. Now, human papillomavirus is part of our makeup. Human papillomavirus is something that all women, virtually all women, have at some time in their lives in their reproductive tract. The entire Gardasil fantasy was created for one reason and one reason only: marketing. And the marketing is not specifically the vaccine, although there's a lot of money in marketing vaccines. The market is the after market, the cancer, the cardiovascular disease, the leukemia, which is a type of cancer, the infertility, the immune system destruction, and the diseases, the profitable diseases that come from that. That's what the marketing is about. Let's talk about the award that Merck received for creating Gardasil and its market out of nothing, out of thin air.
God, you're really going back. It was out of thin air. They received an award. I'd have to dig back to my archives to find it, and I wrote a press release on it. And it was for their marketing campaign to create a market out of thin air. So we created organizations. That's one of them. Truth About Gardasil was another one. We created organizations out of thin air to combat them on this. And we have been pretty effective. Actually, I think really more than the organizations themselves. Sad to say that the 25,000 girls, which is only 1 to 10% of the vaccine-injured population reporting, those 25,000 reports to theirs, are probably more influential than anything else going on right now, just by word of mouth, that we have been able to keep the uptake numbers very, very low. It is so interesting to read about women's health in the finance business section of newspapers. That's where you need to go to find out about women's health.
Whoa, now there is a real kicker of an idea. Say it again, Leslie.
You need to find out about women's health in the business finance sections of newspapers, and you'll understand what this is all about. This is about the manipulation and medicalization of women's bodies for profit. End of story. Period. End of story. Right there. How I got into this HPV vaccine was, really 90% of women pass HPV within 2 years, and no problem. My concern was, and it has been validated, it has been well grounded, that we are vaccinating a population of women at the most fragile time of their lives, which is menarche, the time of first menstruation. That is when our reproductive systems are trying to develop their own endocrine rhythm. And here we are giving a re-challenge, a 3-series shot of high doses of aluminum, L-histidine, and plus all the other toxins in the vaccine, including borax, which is a rat poison. Oh, did I mention that? And at a time when a woman's reproductive system is just trying to develop its own rhythm, as I mentioned. And not only that, we are vaccinating women without regards to where they are in their menstrual cycle. The government knows immunity is at its lowest point during menstruation, or during menstruation, or as I like to say, paramenstruum, which means the premenstrual phase as well as the bleeding phase. Now stop, everyone think. When do you get that migraine? When do you get that herpes sore on your mouth or in your vagina? When do you get that cold? When do you feel crummy in your life? When are you most argumentative? When are you most depressed? When do you have those panic attacks? When does your world look the most dismal? Oh, I got my period. Oh, okay, now I feel better. All these things happen right before we start to menstruate, and we think, and we fall into this deep, dark black hole, and some of us can never get out again. But most of us, when our hormones rise on the other side, we are able to come out again, and we go, "Oh my God, that's why I did that. Oh my God, that's why I yelled at the kids. Oh my God, my poor husband. Oh my God, I can't believe I said that to him. Oh my God, I can't believe I left my job." We do this all the time in our lives. For some of us, it's too late. But we need to understand this hormone thing that's happening. Our hormones drop. It's actually a very sacred time when we're in control of it. But we're just afraid of the dark side of ourselves. We need to embrace that part of ourselves. We are the most intuitive, spiritual, psychic beings during this perimenstruum. But it's been also warped and distorted, and we've been drugged to ignore it. But that's when we're the most powerful. And here we are vaccinating girls, going back to the HPV vaccine, without regard to where they are when their immunity is the lowest. Does that make sense to anybody?
What you're saying, Leslie, implies that if we were careful about when we were vaccinating girls, we would be able to give them safer vaccines. I would suggest that there is no such thing as a safe vaccine.
I agree with you.
And therefore, it's irrelevant. Stay with me here, because I'm agreeing with everything you're saying except one of your conclusions. It's irrelevant where a girl is in her menstrual cycle. She should never be vaccinated for anything.
Yes, there is no such thing as safe, effective vaccines, blah, 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 or necessary vaccines for that matter.
And we're also vaccinating boys to protect the uteruses that they don't have. And we're vaccinating girls and boys with something that I have every reason to believe, and so does anybody who thinks about it clearly, causes infertility.
Yep.
So what we're doing is stealthily stealing the ability to reproduce from humanity.
Well, oh man, how many hours do we have on this one?
Well, the other one was 200. This one's about 2,000. But having done that, I'm going to read you the title of an article, the lead article in Sayer G's wonderful greenmedinfo.com newsletter. Folks, if you're not on the greenmedinfo.com newsletter distribution list, you're making a mistake, and you should be. That's greenmedinfo.com. Sign up for their newsletter. Amazingly important information. Sometimes what he does is take information that's been out there for a while and pull it together in a little review article. This is what he's done with this headline and the article that follows it. Let me read it to you, and let me get your response, Ralph, and your response, Leslie's. The article is How X-ray Mammography is Accelerating the Epidemic of Cancer. Women's Health and Money at an Intersection. Let's talk about mammography.
Well, what sense is there in radiating the breast? What sense is there is in lobbing off the breast? What medicine is about is raping and maiming the body, and that's where science is finally catching up. And women's bodies have been victimized by that for a long time. You don't cut off a breast to save the body. It doesn't make any sense. You don't rip out the uterus. I mean, there was an article that came out not too long ago, Dr. Labo. Marilyn They found this in Marilyn Monroe's archives. She had a note taped to her abdomen saying, "Please do not take my ovaries," when she was being wheeled into the operating room for an appendectomy.
Right.
Because women, they go in, they take anything out that they want out of a woman's body, and I'd imagine that happens to men too, but certainly around reproductive organs. Oh, look at that uterus. Oh, that doesn't look right. Let's take it out.
Right,
Doesn't
exactly.
need that anymore. Let's take it out.
Well, it's almost you want to talk about the penetrator paradigm. It certainly seems that a lot of modern medicine is penetrator paradigm on steroids.
I think that's a very, very important concept. Could you talk about that more, Ralph?
I suspect that you, as a psychiatrist, and Leslie, as much more of an expert in this field, would have more to say about it than I would. But it would seem to me that the old patriarchal, and it's exemplified by the Roman notions about sex, the old patriarchal concept of the dominator being the penetrator, and then the doctors coming in with their knives and penetrating and cutting away breasts, and doing things that would be considered gross mutilation, but for their license.
But for their license. Let me read you an excerpt from the study, the 2006 paper published in the British Journal of Radiobiology. The paper is called Enhanced Biological Effectiveness of Low Energy X-rays, and Implication for the UK Breast Screening Program. Now, the background for this, one of the many things that this ties to, and remember, we're talking about cycles, things tie to each other, things relate to each other. One of the things that this ties to is the notion that there is no such thing as a healthy low or a safe low dose of radiation. We know that there are U-shaped curves for things like lead, in which the lower and the much higher doses are actually more dangerous than the mid-range doses. So let me read this to you. Think about women's health. Think about Fukushima. Think about your lying and dominating government. Quote, recent radiobiological studies have provided compelling evidence that the low-energy X-rays, as used in mammography, are approximately 4 times, but possibly as much as 6 times more effective in causing mutational damage. Think cancer. That's what mutational damage means. Are more effective in causing mutational damage than higher energy X-rays. Since current radiation risk estimates are based on the effect of high energy gamma radiation, hang on to your seats, listen to this. This implies that the risks of radiation-induced breast cancers for mammography X-rays are underestimated by the same factor. The same factor is 4, possibly 6 times. We've known this for at least 30 years. The Swedish government published the same sort of data 30 years ago, and yet, because you find out about women's health in the financial section of your newspaper and your television programs, and yet mammography has been pushed as part of the October pink ribbon nonsense, and the use of detection has become the same thing through advertising as prevention. And it doesn't detect, by the way, it doesn't work very well. It misses cancers 30% of the time. It overdiagnoses cancer 30% of the time. And it causes cancer much more than 30% of the time. We're talking about domination and destruction. And women's bodies are particularly subject to this. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you, Leslie.
Sorry, no, not at all. I mean, we have to understand that cancer is a made-up term. fear term. It is another label that we've come to fear. Um, and tumors come and go in our bodies at all times, and a lot of them for women are hormonally induced. And that is right. They come and go with the rise in the ebb and the flow of our hormones. And so when we go into have for a pap smear, or we go in for a breast exam, and it's not, we don't know where we are in our menstrual cycle and what our hormones are doing, and the doctor goes, "Oh my God, I feel a lumpy breast," and this happened to me, by the way. And then we're sent off to some specialist, or then we have to go in for another pap smear. The rule of thumb, women, never get an exam done when you are premenstrual. Never go in for a dental exam. Never start treatment. Never go see a psychiatrist. Never go to your doctor when you are premenstrual. That is the low point of your cycle, and that is when they are going to nab you and rape you and get you. And for made-up diseases, because our menstrual cycle is just too complicated for us to understand, is what they say. And when we don't put two and two together, we don't understand that we are driven by hormones. And these hormones ebb and flow in our body. Just like natural cycles, just like the sun rises and the moon rises, and the sun sets and the moon sets, and the flowers open and the flowers close. These are all cycles. This is what happens. But so a lot of us are misdiagnosed. We are misclassified. There's now a severe form of PMS, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and it's classified as a mental illness. Women were locked up for this all the time. Men beat their wives. Oh, she was so premenstrual, I just had to lash out and hit her. And it's accepted. This is wrong. We need to get control of the system, our hormone cycle, understand our hormone cycle, so we can take control of our bodies back, so we're not irradiated, so no one can come in and lob off our breast, so no one can come in and rip out our uterus, because we're hysterical.
It sounds like everything is interrelated, isn't it?
Everything is interrelated.
Now, that brings me to an important question, Leslie. You said you were going to be able to be with us for an hour, and it's an hour and 15 minutes, so thank you for extra time. But we've announced that you are the coordinator of the Women's Health Freedom Coalition. The trustees, respecting you and having great trust in what you tell us and what you've done, are just honored to have you willing to work with us on this important organization. And the organization, is the one that we launched by going to 4 West Coast cities in late April and early May to introduce General Burt's Fukushima video, because the West Coast is on the front lines of the disaster that is coming at us all in the Northern Hemisphere. And the idea of the Women's Health Freedom Coalition was to mobilize the battle of all mothers. It's not the mother of all battles, as was famously stated a decade or so ago, but rather the battle of all mothers. And as part of that, we've been talking about mobilizing women and the men who work with them, of course, to begin to build database on what is the real radiation situation in the Northern Hemisphere. Because we know the governments are not telling us. They're covering up. They're changing the rules about what is dangerous and what's not dangerous. And we have a lot of people who want to start, getting their Geiger counters and taking readings and posting them somewhere. And we've been talking about doing this for a month now, and we're really happy to have you here. Do you have any thoughts about how the coalition, the Women's Coalition, can really become a force to focus public attention on what's really happening? Because, as you know, in the coming months, with this phony baloney election coming up, in which we have Goldman Sachs Clone 1 versus Goldman Sachs Clone 2, the world is not going to be paying attention to a disaster literally of biblical proportions that's hanging over our head, this sword of Damocles hanging over the Northern Hemisphere. So that's the issue I leave you with and ask you to comment on.
And then I will comment on that, and then I am going to have to go. I just had a Skype message from one of my friends in evacuation from wildfire taking place tomorrow from her home. So I do need to go and give support to my friends who are being threatened by this wildfire.
Of course.
I think, and I will go back to what I stated in the first hour. I think the most effective way to affect change is to wake up women, um, and to wake up women to the realization that we do have a lot of power. We have to stop being drugged. We have to stop letting the technology in this world run away with our lives, which is what it is doing. I mean, building nuclear plants on earthquake faults and on the shores of Japan was just ridiculous to begin with. We've got massive amounts of garbage that's about and debris from this tsunami in Japan that happened a year ago March, about to wash up on the shores of the Pacific coast, forever damaging the ecosystem on the Pacific coastline. This world needs women desperately. If we are going to survive, this world needs the voice of women, and women need to open up to the power that we have individually and collectively, and start saying no to the drugs, to the birth control. We need to start taking control of our fertility. Men, you need to zip up your pants. Give us a break.
Leslie, we're so honored to have you. We know you have to go. We have a wildfire of anti-female control and harm coming from medicine, coming from science, coming from legislation. But at the same time, we also have an anti-life tsunami coming at us from the globalist agenda. You see, they're the same thing. In coming weeks and months, Leslie Carol Botha will be coordinating and announcing and innovating our Women's Health Freedom Coalition programs. We're honored to have her with us as a colleague, as a friend, and as a thought leader. And she has to go help a friend evacuate from a wildfire.
Yep.
We have a wildfire politically and medically as well as physically. Go, be well, and thank you for being with us, Leslie.
And thank you so much for the honor for joining both you and Ralph. I cannot tell you what it
Our pleasure.
We acknowledge for 30 years of work and trying to empower women with the knowledge that we are goddesses. We have a voice. Our intuitive self is alive and well, and we need to add that to this world conversation. It's desperately needing our voice, and we will do this one woman at a time. We are going to wake up the world, empower women, and we will change this world so it becomes sustainable and loving, compassionate, whole, and spiritual.
Works for me, except for the fact that I don't want to wake up one woman at a time. We don't have time. I'd like
That's
to wake
why we're
up.
on the radio.
That's
I got out of
exactly
the
right.
office and went on to the radio, and I went, screw this.
Exactly. It should be perhaps 1 million women at a time in
Absolutely.
tranches on a daily basis.
Let's do this thing, because women are wonderful beings. Absolutely. We have so much to contribute, and this is the time to do it. Dr. Rabo, you are the great leader, and thank you so much. I am so glad to be here with you on this platform. Ralph, yourself, you are such a compassionate, loving man, and this is such a great honor for me. Thank you, and I must go.
Thank you.
Thank
Leslie.
you,
More to
Leslie.
follow.
Well, we'll have Leslie on fairly regularly on the Dr. Rima Reports as the Women's Health Freedom Coalition begins to ramp up activities through its online forum and the other methods of communication that we're developing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely will do.
Yep.
Thank you both.
Right.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, folks, what we usually do here on the Dr. Rima Reports is we begin with a health freedom review for the week that was and what's coming up. Obviously, because of the situation with Leslie and her willingness to share some time with us, even though she is literally facing and her neighbors and friends are facing a cataclysmically destructive wildfire. That was an act of love on Leslie's part, and I'm very grateful to
She
her
is wonderful.
for that. She could have said, "No, I'm sorry, I have to go do the things that you do when you have a wildfire coming to your steps," but she gave us an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm very grateful. However, now let's go back to what we would have done at the beginning of the show if Leslie hadn't been facing a time situation like that. So let's talk about this week's health freedom situation and what's coming up. Ralph.
Indeed. There's so much going on. Well, maybe from the health freedom perspective, there was a major piece of news in the political front. Ron Paul acknowledged that his efforts to get the Republican nomination will probably gain him no more than 500 delegates at the convention in August. And shortly after that announcement, his son Rand Paul saying that his first choice had always been his father, but since the decision is now taken away from them, and he's going to be endorsing one of the two Goldman Sachs clones. I don't know even which one. But it is a moment when real politics seems to be interfering with some of the politicians that we had hoped would be pursuing health freedom goals. Well, he's a good Republican. I'm happy not to be a Republican. Well, actually, I think I'm still registered at the moment, but that's going to change shortly. That's the political news. As I said earlier with Leslie, we're going to have to be paying more attention to the political news over the next few months as we get closer to the election, not particularly because of who's going to end up in the White House, because it hardly makes a difference from our standpoint in terms of health freedom. I'm afraid that there's no indication at all, unless the Republicans who are in favor of health freedom pursue changes in their party platform, and unless the party platform has an influence on the sitting president, it seems to me that we have to focus in on finding out who our friends are in Congress.
And I have this bridge I'd like to sell you.
Exactly. No, it's that's why I'm very interested in finding out what the other candidates have to say about health freedom, since I don't think that either of the two tax eater party candidates will say anything different and anything that we would find very helpful. But there are other people running for president, and I think we need to look at them, and we need to enlist them in the health freedom movement. We need to get them to become spokespeople, because they're going to be talking to millions of people. Former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, for example, will be probably on, if not all 50 ballots, he'll be on at least 49. There's one state that's almost impossible to get on. I think it's Oklahoma. But so there'll be three candidates on almost all the ballots in the country. The two tax eater candidates and Gary Johnson. There will also be the Green Party running candidate. I don't know whether Ralph Nader is going to be running again or not. We'll find out, I suppose. But these individuals often have much more friendly positions when it comes to health freedom and food freedom and controlling the bureaucracy's invasion of our health choices. So we need to look at them and pay attention to what they're saying, so that we can piggyback, if you will, on their campaigns and make their campaigns more relevant to health freedom issues. So that's the big picture of the news coming up over the next few months.
And what's happening with the Supreme Court and Obamacare?
We are still waiting for a decision. It is June. They do go on summer vacation at the end of the month, I believe. I expect that we will, in the next couple of weeks, have a Supreme Court decision, which is going to be very important, because it's going to set the tone for the campaign and for a lot of things going forward. I don't know how they're going to come out. The court has, surprised us various times. I guess the other good news of the week is that reactors number 4 and number 2 have not collapsed. There have been a few more earthquakes here and there, but nothing has brought them down quite yet. We know from a mailing that went out, and those of you who have been joining our special mailing lists are going to want to pay attention and make sure you get on those lists. One mailing that went out indicated that there is a 90% chance of a 7.0 in that part of the world in the next 3 years, and there's a 100% chance that if a 7.0 occurs near Fukushima, buildings 4 and 2 will come down. So does that mean you have 3 years? I'm not sure, because it could happen any day.
You have 3 years.
It means
I don't believe that.
Exactly.
I believe that what those numbers mean is that the die is cast. It's just a question of when the dice will hit the game.
Exactly. And think about it. If it's 90% in 3 years, isn't it 45% in a year and a half? That means that there's a 50-50 chance.
No, I don't believe the statistics work like that.
Okay.
I think what the geologists are telling us is that the indicators are strong, that we are now in a major earthquake situation, and that we know from what the geological and electromagnetic indicators are, how they're lined up at this point, that when we've seen this before, and we have, of course, seismologists study this stuff all the time. When we've seen this before, what we've seen is that within 3 years, any time within 3 years, in 30 seconds or in 2 years, 9 months, but any time within 3 years, we're at the same probability state for when an earthquake of this magnitude will occur. So 90% likelihood that within 3 minutes, 3 months, 3 years, we're going to see this kind of earthquake activity. The science of seismic prediction is not accurate enough to say that in 11 days, 14 hours and 26 minutes, we're going to see this kind of quake, because the Earth has many, many, many factors impacting on it. What we can say is that with 90% certainty, we can say that we know that there will be this size quake sometime within that window. You can't slice and dice it and say, well, we've only got a 45% chance within the first year, or a 30% chance within the first year, and then it's the same chance the entire time.
Got it.
And then once it happens, it becomes 100%.
It becomes 100% for certain.
Now you have 3D earthquake on your computer.
Yes, I do.
You watch earthquake activity daily. And what you see, because you often Skype it to me, and when I have time I look at it too, but you often Skype me the latest earthquake activity. And what you're seeing, you're not a seismologist, you're a legal seismologist and a health freedom seismologist, but not a geoseismologist. What you often see, and what you often notate to me, is that there is an absolute, not a relative, increase in seismic activity on the whole planet.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to put that screen right here so the people who are watching us can see it.
Right. Especially in the Ring of Fire, and that's the entire Pacific boundary.
This is cool.
Especially the activity of the Earth, whether it's because of the planetary influences pulling at the Earth and causing tectonic stress, whether it's because of some other process, the maximum solar flares that we're seeing. We don't know why, but what we do know is what. And what is that there is an increase in activity. But let's assume that all seismic activity stopped in Japan suddenly. You know, my magic wand were working and I waved it around, and all of a sudden, let's assume that there were zero seismic activity in and around the entire island of Japan. Okay. Even without the seismic impact, you've got a building 100 feet in the air containing more than 1,300 spent fuel rods. I'm sorry, containing more than 1,300 rods, the vast majority of which are spent rods, which means, of course, that they're much more radioactive than the fresh rods. Most of them are spent. And you have the water no longer being able to be maintained at 100 feet of water depth to control it. Not very far away, you've got another spent fuel rod pool, which is not 100 feet in the air, and it's got a similar number of fuel rods. All around the Fukushima Daiichi site, you've got a total of more than 15,000 fuel rods, most of which are spent fuel rods. And an explosion at any one place could ignite the rest, could destabilize the rest. Oh, but you say, we couldn't possibly have an explosion in a spent fuel rod pool. Sure we could. We've already had both nuclear explosions and hydrogen explosions in the Fukushima Daiichi spent fuel rod pools. It's already happened repeatedly since March 11th, 2013. So even if the seismic activity were to simply stop, which we know it will not, the lack of water in the fuel rod pools itself will provide the condition necessary for a nuclear fire, the likes of which, quite literally, the planet has never seen before. Because under its own terms, so to speak, the Earth does not produce the level of radioactive material, the concentration, nor does it produce the what are called the transuranium elements. Those are elements which exist only because they were created in a nuclear pile. They were only created in a nuclear reactor. They include things like the deadliest substance on the planet Earth, plutonium, and sister products like curium, americium, neptunium, and the fact that they're not familiar names to you doesn't mean that they can't kill you. Indeed, that's all they can do. Obviously, if they didn't exist on Earth until the nuclear age, they have no biological function. What they do is emit powerful little packets of energy. That's what ionizing radiation is, which screws up every process with which it interacts, especially but not limited to your DNA. And once that happens, the results are cataclysmic, genocidal. So we're talking about something that is absolutely certain to occur, whether or not there is another 7.0 or greater earthquake. And of course there will be another 7.0 earthquake in Japan, in the Fukushima region. If it doesn't occur naturally, then I have no doubt that the good old USA will provide another one exactly like the first one when they decide that it's time to bring the life-sustaining capacity of the Northern Hemisphere to a close. Now, that would have been completely insane talk not so long ago. But with the electronic footprint or fingerprint information that we have about the activities of HAARP around the Fukushima earthquake, the Haiti earthquake, the Santiago earthquake, and the Christchurch earthquake, now that we have that data corresponding so well, telling us that, of course, the HAARP units were being used to beam 2.4 cycles per second energy at 1.5 billion kilowatt hours into the Earth to get the Earth to start vibrating. When the Earth vibrates in that way, it's called an earthquake. Oh, also Guangdong in China, where an entire mountain was pulverized, and what was under the mountain was China's entire forward nuclear arsenal. It'll be quite a while before they can dig that out. So what we're looking at is manipulated and man-made, controlled, cataclysmic destruction of more than biblical proportions. If you don't think it's going to happen because there's only a 90% statistical chance of an earthquake in the next 3 years, then you have not seen General Bert's video and you have not understood what it means. And by the way, I'd like to ask each and every one of you to send the people that you know about and that you're concerned about having this information, that you want to have this information, to www.generalbert.com. Have them enter their email and they will start receiving special messages that are only available to people who have put their names, their email addresses, not their names, into www.generalbert.com. So I've put that on the chat and said enter email address to receive ongoing, and this is important, ongoing updates on the Fukushima, Fukushima, Fukushima situation and its implications. So that's not old news, that's new news. The question is, what's the next new news? And the answer is, it's not good.
That's indeed true, Dr. Rima. And I'm looking at our friends at Natural Health News, just looking at the headlines, because it always helps us to get a little sense of what's been running around. And we have one headline that says, cops taser 8-month pregnant woman over parking ticket dispute. Another one says, boost your defenses against flesh-eating bacteria. Apparently MRSA is on its way again. Latest attack on calcium fails to link mineral to heart attacks. That's interesting. Now they're claiming calcium is bad for you.
Well, Sam, let's talk about that. Calcium is very, very, very bad for you if what? If the form of calcium you're eating is rocks. When was the last time, Ralph?
I had a good chew on a rock. Well, I chew on rocks regularly.
Do you?
No.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, gee, this is something I don't know about, but I learned so much from you. Could have been. If what you're eating is oyster shells as calcium, because it's cheap and easily available, and that's how most calcium is made. They take eggshells, they grind them up, or they take calcium carbonate, they grind them up, or they take bones and they grind them up, and then they press them into a tablet or put them into the chocolate piece or whatever. If that's the form of calcium that you're eating, of course it's bad for you, and at the same time, it's actively not good for you, because as Anon 3708 just typed into our chat at healthfreedomportal.org, the body can't assimilate those forms of calcium. Right, you can't assimilate calcium that comes from rocks or eggshells or bones. They're not part of our diet, and we don't have the enzymes necessary to assimilate those. I want to point out that the only things that we can assimilate, if we're eating them, if we're not getting them intravenously, the only things that we can assimilate are the things that we have enzymes for, enzymes being the stuff of life. We cannot assimilate rocks, bones, or eggshell. We can assimilate calcium in forms that are already biological. For example, when you eat spinach, you get calcium that your body can use. And there are other biologically bioavailable forms of calcium. Those, along with vitamin D, do help to prevent osteoporosis, osteopenia, and along with progesterone, do actually reverse bone disease. Those do, in fact, in my belief, along with fish oil and vitamin E, do help to prevent heart attacks. Those do help a whole variety of biological processes. You have only to look at a textbook on biochemistry index and look up calcium to see how very many processes calcium is essential to. Calcium is the most common mineral in the body. It is the mineral that is in greatest store in the blood. If you don't have enough calcium in your blood, your body will rob it from your bones. You could say that the bones and teeth of the body are actually calcium bank accounts. The body will do anything it has to keep the blood levels of calcium correct, because the body dies very quickly if they're not correct. The parathyroid gland is specifically devoted to nothing but calcium metabolism. Without proper parathyroid function, you will go into seizures and you will die because of the calcium distortion. But if you're eating rocks, it doesn't help. And so eating rocks is a bad idea. Eating rocks is a dumb idea, but it's a psychologically, it's an economically desirable idea because rocks are cheap. If you're buying cheap vitamins, and cheap minerals, you are asking for trouble.
Got it. That's a very good point, Dr. Rima. Very good point indeed. Now, we have just 16 or 17 minutes left on the program today. This has been an exciting program. I'm really happy we had a chance to chat with Leslie, because she's going to be collaborating with us very closely. Perhaps you'd like to tell people a little bit about your recent travels and where you are now and what's going on.
Exactly. I'm so excited. We just got back from almost, what was it? 3 weeks, close on 3 weeks in Chile. This is our 4th visit to Chile. The first thing I'd like to do is suggest that if you're on the chat or the archives, that you should access the link that I'm going to put up in just a moment. Just give me 1 second. I'm pulling up the link, and I'm going to put it on the chat. This is the link to General Bert's extraordinary webinar on low radiation migration. Ralph, I am not finding that link.
I've put up on the screen, it's tinyurl.com. Rad Protect is that data one, but you want the lowradmigration.com, I believe. Let me double check, and I'll post that on the screen as well. I think it's whoops. There we go. Can't talk and type at the same time. Yeah, here it is, lowmigration.org. lowradmigration.org. Let me use this super new setup device. There we go. Low radiation relocation webinar. All right.
I will go back into, I should know this by heart now, but unfortunately, here it is. I have it, and I'm going to put it up right now. You know, Ralph, we really should have this featured prominently at the top of our web page, at the top of our home page, I should say, so that anybody can go there at any time.
That's a good idea. I'm able to check that out right this minute.
Right.
Let's see if we can get that to happen.
Now that's the low radiation migration webinar that General Bert hosted. Enormously important, full of information about the orderly, sensible migration of people who are now, I have to say, radiation refugees. And that will be a good idea until and unless the United States or the recipient countries close their borders. Think about it. If you were another country, would you want migrants coming to you, all of whose personal goods were radioactive and whose bodies had been exposed to radiation, so that large numbers of them were going to develop heart disease, neurological disease, cancer, serious health problems, and they were going to be a drain on your health system? Probably not.
No.
I think by one, countries will begin closing the door to Americans. But right now, the doors are open in some countries. Now, banking doors are not open to most to Americans in most countries around the world. The U.S. OECD, and I'm putting that on the chat. OECD, the U.S. OECD pressure has made it so costly and difficult for countries to have U.S. bank accounts there, to have U.S. citizens conducting business there, that, as was intended to happen, they have said, we really don't want your money, no matter how big your bank account. France, Switzerland, the UK, a whole lot of countries, including, I'm sad to say, Panama, now simply do not want the bank accounts and the businesses of Americans, no matter how legitimate, no matter how prosperous and positive those enterprises are. There are a few countries that still are open. United States. So
Dr. Rima, you're breaking up a little bit, and let me say that I do have the Low Radiation Migration ebook link on the main Health Freedom USA.org webpage. It is in the pink block, and I am now putting that pink block up on the screen.
Good. Let me tell the people who are listening to this show live or on archive or watching the chat that there are several resources. One is a health resource, and that is www.tinyurl.com/radprotect. One is an update resource, and that is available starting with General Byrd's Fukushima estimate of situation and moving forward with frequent updates at www.generalbyrd.com. And then there is the Low Radiation Migration webinar, and that is available at the link that I put up there. So these are the four general areas of information that we're providing. GeneralByrt.com, when you put your email address in, gives you ongoing updates that General Byrt creates for you and will come automatically to your email box. So these are very, very important. Now, in Chile, bank accounts from Americans are welcome. Businesses from Americans are welcome. Chile has the strongest economy in South America. It is an orderly country. I have to tell you, from a personal point of view, time utilization in Chile makes me very happy. Time utilization in Panama makes me crazy. Nobody ever keeps an appointment on time. Nobody, ever. It's as if time doesn't exist. It's all very charming when you're a tourist. It's a pain in the patoot when you're trying to do anything serious. In Chile, everybody's on time all the time. It's really cool. We came to an appointment on time, and the people who were there were either ready for us or there was a reason, like, for instance, I'm so sorry, I'm meeting with one of the government ministers. I will reschedule with you, and then they were on time for that meeting. Chile is a diverse and very beautiful country. Did you know, you probably didn't, did you know that Chile actually grows most of our heritage seeds, our organic heritage seeds? The growing climate is so good and the purity of the air and so on is so amazing that Chile grows our organic and heritage seeds, and then they are brought to the United States in huge fiberglass bags, up there in time for your spring planting. And they are U.S. heritage seeds. What that means is when you go to Chile, if you want to raise a garden, if you want to do commercial farming, you do not have to import seed from the United States because the U.S. is importing it from Chile. Well,
Very interesting, Dr. Rima. That's the sort of connection that you're not going to see unless you go there and scope out the ground. I can see why these trips have been so important. Details like that.
From intelligent people that is just extraordinary. I'll give you an example. We were having dinner. The food is phenomenal, and I've been taking my Geiger counter with me to supermarkets and restaurants and measuring background radiation and target radiation, and it's very low, very low. So we were at a spectacular Vietnamese restaurant, and the Gail, our executive director, was with us, Gail Koba, and she is unfortunately a smoker. She went to their smoking section to feed her addiction, and she came back all glowy. If you know Gail, you know that she glows beautifully. Hey, give me some cards. I just met a guy at the bar who's going to help us. So we said, sure. And he came and he sat down with us. Bilingual is the investment officer for a major pension fund, and he is very interested in investing his pension fund's dollars, well, actually they're pesos, his pension fund's resources in our projects, because he and the pension fund managers believe in our tipping point projects so firmly. So we're following up with him, and he gave us advice and information about exactly what that firm needs in order to have the documentation for the Fund for Natural Solutions correct. We met that kind of openness, we met that kind of understanding of the globalist agenda and the ways to stop it pretty much everywhere we have gone so far in Chile. And we have met with people at the very top of the society, and we've met with the chambermaids. It doesn't matter whom we're talking to, as long as our Spanish is good enough or their English is good enough. There's a compatibility of worldview that's really quite staggering. You know how hard it is to tell the people that you talk to, your friends, your family, your relations, your colleagues at work, about the stuff that you now understand. They don't want to hear it. Well, imagine how refreshing it would be to have conversations without the barriers, because people already know. Remember, if you haven't traveled yet outside the United States, you can't imagine how much more sophisticated folks are in many parts of the world about the globalist agenda. They may not know very much about the U.S. police state yet, but they have enough background information so that they hear you, and that's very nice. The land is gorgeous. It's diverse. If you want a desert, you can go to the north, up towards the equator to the Atacama Desert. You got just one hot, dry puppy there. If you want glaciers, you go to the south, to the Patagonia Glaciers, which is just basically across the water from Antarctica. You want cold, you want blustery, you want blowy and windy, you got it. You also have everything in between, with a few exceptions. They can't grow coffee in Chile, but they pretty much grow almost everything else. And my bet is that if you're getting fresh fruits and vegetables in the market in the dead of winter, a good many of them are coming from Chile already. Chile is not a paradise. They've got some problems. It's permitted
Dr. Rima, you're breaking up a bit.
location. Beekeepers sued the government. Bees are harmed, and because they can't keep their hives away. The GMOs, if they don't know what they are, yeah,
Dr. Rima, I'm sorry, you're really breaking up badly.
but they can be used in.
Can you hear me?
That's interesting. That needs to change, and people are eager to change it. Chile is a very orderly society, not like Singapore, where you can get publicly for misdemeanors. It's a country that has combined the best of the common law with the best Napoleonic code system, and they have a really workable legal system. It's also not a corrupt country. Do not ever try to bribe a Chilean traffic officer, because you're going to be in jail faster than you can blink. It's not a primitive country. Santiago is a European country, a European city with cafes and art districts and old districts and walking streets and spectacular restaurants and amazing shopping. It's with varied neighborhoods. It's a delightful city. And oh, by the way, we will shortly be initiating our friendly food co-op, bringing food from the south to the north. That food is not radioactive. I know, because I measured it with my Geiger counter. And we have our exporter in place. We are about to sign a memorandum of understanding with the exporter so that we can bring you the food. It'll go to FDA approved warehouses, and our fulfillment center will send you whatever you order, and we'll start with products that are already prepared, because the logistics of bringing you fresh meat and vegetables and chicken and eggs and so on, things that can spoil, are not where we are. We're starting with the logistics of the prepared, the bottled foods. These foods are in glass containers. They are spectacular. We have visited with the producers. We have the laboratory analyses. This is real food, and my God, is it spectacular. Oh my heavens, just astounding. So our trip has been very productive. Now we're in LA for two purposes. One is to measure the radiation here. I don't trust anybody else's measurement. I surely don't trust anybody who gets money from the US government. I do not trust home Geiger counters that are not properly calibrated. Well-meaning people can have a Geiger counter, but if they don't know how to calibrate it, and if they can't document their calibration, the numbers don't mean anything. So I will know what is close to radiation. I hope when we get back to Panama, we're going to be detoxing very vigorously. Those things at radprotect.com or tinyurl.com/radprotect, those are things that we do on a regular basis, folks. With the exception of iodide, that's not something you take on a regular basis. So we're talking about a wonderful option for people who get the problem and who want to protect themselves and their families in a booming economy that is stable. The South has to feed the North if the North is going to survive. As many of you as possible need to think about getting out. Those of you who can't get out, and those of you who are getting out but are there for a while, need clean food. And you also need an awareness that your time is limited, both because of the quake activity and the evaporation activity, and that we anticipate that borders will close. So that's my update. Ralph, you wanna
Well, we have 1 minute left. Indeed, a powerful update. What can I say after you tell me that those of us who are about to be irradiated, we are certainly grateful that there will be good food coming north. We are also grateful that there are people like you and General Burt and Gail who are exploring the southern possibilities for us. 4 billion people are not moving south, but certainly there will be astute people who will be there to help the rest of us in the north survive. This has been another Dr. Rima Reports at www.healthfreedomusa.org, directly at www.healthfreedomportal.org. Thank you, Dr. Rima. It is 12 o'clock noon. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Sneaking up on our freedoms, destroying our health, shredding the Constitution, taking away our wealth. Ah, but we're the men and women following freedom's trail, following where the truth leads, we will prevail. Sneaking up on our freedoms, destroying our health, shredding the Constitution, taking away our wealth. Ah, but we're the men and women following freedom's trail, following where the truth leads.